Hello and welcome. My name is Jordan Burnham, and today you'll be hearing a Minding Your Mind webinar called Spilling the Tea with POC in LGBT. Before getting into the panel discussion, I wanted to give an introduction to why we're doing this. On May 26, I received a text that I've received far too many times. A message popped up from my friend in our group text, and it said, "Have you seen the video from last night?" That text was referring to the video of George Floyd being killed by a police officer. And in that same thread, I said, it is mentally exhausting to be Black in America, especially when a problem that feels so overwhelming to some is unfortunately overlooked and never talked about amongst others. But this felt different. The video and the picture was shared everywhere, and people felt as though they couldn't just look the other way. The protests began in Minneapolis, and eventually there were protests in all 50 states. It heightened the awareness of police brutality in America, which then shifted into a more nuanced discussion about the systemic oppression of marginalized communities in this country. So the first thing that I want to do is define systemic oppression. Systemic oppression is defined as the systematic mistreatment of people within a social identity group, supported and enforced by the society and its institutions, solely based on the person's membership in this social identity group. And when I think of systemic oppression, I think of it in two parts. The first is an assertion agreed upon by society. And the second is the practice of creating barriers to protect the group that benefit from that assertion. The two must act together. Being Black, I always think of this in historical context, because when the first slaves arrived in 1619, there was one assertion made. If I am white and you are Black, you are lesser than me, solely based on the color of your skin. Therefore, you don't deserve the same resources, treatment, respect, and freedom that I receive. That is the assertion. And what follows is systemic oppression that creates barriers in order to protect that assertion. That was done by taking away freedom, both through slavery and mass incarceration, denying equal resources and opportunities through segregation, denying Black people the opportunity to buy homes in the same neighborhood as white people, making it more difficult for Black people to vote, apply for the same jobs, and earn the same pay as white people. Hiring discrimination is only one of the barriers that fall under systemic oppression, but it is one that speaks directly to that assertion made in 1619. Because if my name comes up on a resume, and my name makes the employer assume I'm Black, I'm now statistically less likely to receive a call back. If I am Black and you are white, and we have identical resumes, you are still more likely to receive a call back for that job opportunity. Systemic oppression affects the way Black people are treated, not only in job employment, but also in the education, healthcare, social service, and criminal justice systems as well. But the societal association of you are lesser than someone can come in the form of classism, sexism, homophobia, and transphobia. That's why I love this quote from Ashley Marie Preston. If we aren't actively working to dismantle systems of oppression simultaneously, we're passively sustaining it. Now, the reason we're able to have a webinar based on different perspectives of the relationship between mental health and minorities is because of intersectionality. The term intersectionality was first coined by law professor and social theorist Kimberly Crenshaw in 1989. Intersectionality asserts that people are often disadvantaged by multiple sources of oppression: their race, class, gender, identity, sexual orientation, religion, and other identity markers. For instance, I'm part of a community that has been plagued with systemic racism and oppression, but I still recognize and understand my privilege as a cisgender straight male in America. That's why I'm so happy that you'll be hearing from 4 of our young adult speakers who will be sharing about experiences both similar and different from mine. We all have intersecting identities that shape the way that we experience the world and the way the world perceives us. This experience for everyone affects our mental health. When we recognize not only that facts, but have open conversations about it, we begin to bring a greater understanding towards ourselves and each other. And I feel it's important to hear the perspectives of each speaker in order to have a better understanding of identity and the communities of minorities. It's important to note that while we are members of several groups, we know we're not representing everyone, and that some people's experience of being marginalized is more extreme than others. But many can relate to the experience of feeling unheard, unseen, and struggling through difficult things, which is exactly what I mean by saying experiences can be both similar and different at the same time. If you don't look like us or fit into some of the groups described, maybe you're thinking, this isn't for you. But it is, because this webinar is also a call to action of what an ally can do to help. So at this point, I would love to bring in our young adult speakers so that they can introduce themselves and get to hear their perspectives and their stories. With us today, we have Elizabeth, Brooke, Sarika, and Joey. First, I want to thank all of you for coming on and being willing to share your experiences. So Brooke, would you like to go first in introducing yourself and tell us why you wanted to be involved in this conversation?
Yeah, sure. So hi, everyone. My name is Brooke Bridges, and I am bisexual. I'm biracial, half Black and half white. And my family is bicoastal, which I don't know if that makes me, different, but East Coast, West Coast, it's kind of cool. And I grew up as a child actress, and I suffered from a lot of mental health challenges because of that. I had low self-esteem. I had no perception of my own worth as a person. I had extreme anxiety, panic attacks, depression, and I utilized a lot of negative coping skills because of that. And, I grew up and always felt like being mixed in particular, I didn't fit in. So I think that's really why I want to be a part of this. I realize that there is something different about me. I am Black and people see me as Black, even though I am mixed. And yeah, I want to be able to share with people that, I am different in the way that my family looks and the way that I look. And also in the way that I felt throughout my time growing up. So being able to share my perspective, I think a lot of people can relate to that. So I just want to share that.
Awesome, thank you. Sarika, I would love to hear from you, your background and why you're excited to share your experience today.
Yes, absolutely. So hi, everyone. My name is Sarika Agarwal. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am South Asian, specifically Indian. I'm really looking forward to speaking with you guys today. I am currently 22 years old, and I began suffering mental health issues as early as around 8 years old. But at that time, I had no clue that they were mental health issues. I just knew that I didn't feel good when it seemed like everyone else did. I was formally diagnosed with anxiety and depression at 13, which was exacerbated through cyberbullying and unhealthy relationships that caused me to develop some really negative coping skills. And I kept so much of this to myself, which inevitably made things worse. My eventual enrollment in therapy was what was able to get me where I am today. And today I am happier and in control of my life more than ever. So I am here today in this webinar because I identify as a South Asian female. And as I got older, I really started to understand how my culture played a large role in the mental health issues that I experienced. So I just wanted to come here today and show you the way that I combated them and share with you the insight into my experience and the takeaways that I've learned.
All right, thank you. Joey, I would love to hear your perspective and what you would like to discuss in this conversation today.
So, hi everyone, I'm Joey Vasquez. My pronouns are he, him. So I grew up in Framingham, Massachusetts. I'm Puerto Rican. Both my parents are Puerto Rican. My mom was born in Puerto Rico, and I'm also bisexual. So I grew up Protestant. I was Seventh-day Adventist, and my home was very, very religious. My parents were very religious, and I grew up in religion. And so growing up, with being bisexual, I really felt like I didn't have a lot of safe spaces in schools. In my school system, there was a lot of racism, so I didn't really feel comfortable being visible as Hispanic because of racism. So I grew up in a diverse town, but I also then grew up around a lot of racism. And so it was in college where I really just realized I didn't like, my ethnicity. I didn't like my sexuality. I grew up with the understanding that those things were holding me back, were in my way. And so in college, I really sort of realized I didn't really like myself. So I became depressed. I became anxious about my sexuality, and I started to self-harm. I started to become suicidal and have suicidal feelings. But then I was able to get to therapy and treatment, and I was able to learn to love myself and these two parts of myself using therapy and medications and finding those safe spaces that I didn't have growing up. And so I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to talk with you all because I think it's a complex topic that we're facing, but it's very, very important. And I'm really happy to see all of you here.
Yeah, awesome. And Elizabeth, I would love to hear from you and why you're excited to share your experiences today.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. I'm Elizabeth. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm really excited to be part of this discussion today. So when I share my story with student groups, I usually talk about perfectionism and control as like these two golden threads that have kind of strung together throughout my life, my various mental health challenges and triumphs. And for me, perfectionism and control are really closely related to the underlying mental health issues I've dealt with for most of my life. Anxiety disorders, depression, insecurity and body dysmorphia. And perfectionism and control have also manifested in my life as self-harm, suicide attempt, anorexia, and substance use. Today, luckily, perfectionism and control are not the thickest threads in my life. Instead, I nurture threads of balance and recovery and resilience with the help of medication, a lot of therapy, my 12-step programs, and the support of my family. So I'm here today because I identify as a queer or gay woman. And I think it's really important to also acknowledge that I am the only white person on this panel, and I'm not also a visible minority. So many of the experiences you'll hear me talk about and many of the experiences you won't hear from me have been very different from those that you might hear from other speakers tonight. But I am here because it's my responsibility to use my privilege in a positive way. And tonight, that is by joining this discussion on two things, excuse me, I think are really important for all of us: mental health and marginalization within our communities.
All right. Sounds like we're all very excited to have this conversation. So actually, I wanted to get started with having the conversation about growing up, as a minority and the internalized beliefs that come along with our mental health within our community. Because we all speak on our stories now, but it wasn't something we were always comfortable with. So Sarika, for you, what was that like growing up?
Yeah, so as a minority and as a member of a South Asian community, I was really ashamed of my mental health. Like, I was super ashamed to have depression and anxiety because in my culture, the two most important factors are academic excellence and reputation. You always need to be bringing home A's and B's. And honestly, B's were almost viewed as sin. Like, that's how high we had to achieve every single time. And you always need to have the perfect life, professionally and personally, or people will talk. A woman could be in her 40s and at the top of her career, but the only thing people will discuss is that she's not married yet. So it put a lot of pressure on me because if I did or said anything that could invite criticism, my reputation and my family's reputation would be tarnished. So at the time, like most South Asians, my family really valued their reputation. So when I began to feel anxious and depressed, I started to really view myself as a burden. I would only talk about it to my mom and my dad. And at the end of every conversation, my father would always say, keep this between us. So it was almost as if making sure no one found out was even more important than making sure I felt better. And then having to constantly hide what I'm feeling, it added so much angst onto the anxiety and the depression that I was already feeling. Because if I stayed home, people would ask questions. And if I went to a gathering and something looked wrong, people would ask questions and I just couldn't give them answers. So my mental health state as a South Asian, it made me feel like this really terrible secret that my parents had to hide. And it lowered the self-confidence that I had already lost so much of because of depression and anxiety. And also, since my depression and anxiety made my mind foggy and my motivation low, I wasn't fulfilling my other presumed duty of academic excellence. So I sort of felt like in the South Asian community, I was a waste of space and like everything would run smoother without me around.
So the part there that I really relate to was basically what is in the thought bubble right there of what happens in this house stays in this house. And I think that's such a strong theme and mindset that's in the Black community. And so staying on that, Brooke, I would love to hear from you. You know, when did you realize kind of the stigma that exists in the Black community? Because like as a kid, I didn't know it really until I started sharing my story and getting into mental health advocacy that I really realized that. So when did that click for you? Oh, Brooke, you're muted.
Sorry. Yep. What I was saying, but you couldn't hear, was for me, it was never even what happens in this house stays in this house, because we just couldn't allow any sort of emotional distress to even happen in the house. So, growing up, I didn't realize that my Blackness and my Black heritage was even connected to mental health. Until I was an adult. And I realized that one of the reasons why we didn't really talk about it is because it's so stigmatized in the African American community. All I knew was that we just didn't talk about emotions. If I were sad, my dad would just tell me to suck it up. If I cried, I was being over dramatic. Just be quiet. Like, you can either smile and be happy or don't say anything at all, kind of thing. And just do as I say. And, over time, I really hardened up. Because what I realize now as an adult is African American people, as we know, have had it really hard in life. So it was kind of like either you harden up and you're tough or you won't survive. If you can't put on a hard face and be strong, and, if you end up crying or feeling weak, you won't survive. Like, I think that's where that kind of just hardening came from. So now as an adult, I obviously understand it. And to be honest, my family really has taken to my own expression of my emotions and are beginning to really see the stigmatization for themselves and kind of open up to that. But yeah, when I was a kid, I just didn't realize it. I just knew emotions, mental health. What is that even kind of thing? So we just didn't talk about it.
I feel like what you just said is it's almost like vulnerability in the community and in your household is considered a weakness. Therefore, you can't be vulnerable or talk about it. So yeah, that's really difficult to kind of navigate. And one of the other things, and kind of the next topic that I wanted to speak on was really identity of being a minority and how much we value that and how much it means to us. And so I love this quote from LaQuanda Roberts Buckley. In order for a person to travel down the road of recovery, you have to acknowledge who that person is on every level. To deny one part of me is to deny my opportunity of recovery and to be healthy. So Joey, for you, how did identity shape the way you looked at mental health, and also that part about wanting to be accepted, your entire identity to be accepted?
Yeah, identity is such a complicated thing to talk about. And so I used to think that identity is this one single fixed thing. Who I was, what I wanted, all my thoughts and feelings, like that was who I was. But then there's also the fact that there's other people in the world and they affect me and they affect how I see the world. And so there's a part of identity, there's a part of who I am that is connected to other people. And it's other people that can influence how I really feel and think about my identity. And so in my life, I was raised in a very religious home. So I was basically told that my sexuality was not something to be happy about. It was something to be hated. I hated my sexuality growing up because of those messages I got. And I didn't know what to do. I realized that I was bisexual in 7th grade, and I just didn't know what to do. So I didn't do anything. I didn't tell anyone. And I kept it to myself all the way until college. And I grew up in a diverse school system, which was nice. But then I also experienced a lot of racism. There was a lot of concern, I guess I could say, about whether someone was documented or not documented in my school system. And so Hispanic people, especially first generation kids, really were discriminated against. And so I'm Hispanic, I'm Puerto Rican, and I really didn't want people in my school system to look at me and think that I was unintelligent or lazy, or I didn't want to work hard, all those sorts of stereotypes that I grew up hearing. And so I was a good student. I wanted to perform well, and so I felt that if people saw that I was, if I didn't speak perfect English, if I said a word wrong, I thought that people would think, oh, he's not educated, he's not smart enough. And so growing up, I really, really hated being Hispanic, being bisexual. I wanted to be white and straight. I wanted to be, seen through that lens, because that was the only way I felt like I could be seen for myself. Because, if I were straight and white, I wouldn't have those stereotypes being pushed onto me. I wouldn't have to worry about those things. And so that's how I wanted to present. So I would practice walking. I would practice talking. I would practice smiling, because I wanted to be perfect. I wanted to show the world that I was a good person, someone worth respecting and listening to. I usually tell people I wanted to be like English Oxford professor. Like, I wanted to sound perfect all the time, because I didn't feel like I was valuable. I didn't feel like I was as valuable as other people, that I needed to make myself valuable by working hard, by getting, good grades, working on extracurriculars. I really felt that if I don't if I don't create or do something, if I just sit around here, I'm not valuable. That who I am, just me, is not important enough. And it was partly, my family, my school system, that shaped how I was viewing my identity. And that ended up, unfortunately, being a negative feeling. Because I think it's really easy to forget that the people who we keep around us and listen to have a strong influence on what we think. And it wasn't until I went to college, where I could be around people who were different and had different ideas, that I was able to think about changing how I felt. And so I went to therapy to change, how I was struggling. I was really struggling with accepting my sexuality. I had to go to change how I felt. But I really think it's important to remember that it also took one person. It took one person to say, it's okay who you are. It doesn't matter that you're bisexual. It's fine. You could be happy about it. That there was another way to think about myself. I needed someone to tell me that. And so a part of identity is our perception of it. And that perception is really, really influenced by who we decide to listen to and who we decide to keep close to us. And so when I think about my identity and how it really influenced my mental health, it was the fact that I didn't have safe spaces. I didn't have places where I could feel like I could be myself. And not having those spaces made it really, really difficult for me to change. How was I supposed to change how I felt about myself? It was such a big challenge when I didn't have any other people to give me a safe space. And so in school, I felt like I needed to act more white so that people would listen and respect me. I was really, really concerned about judgment and being stereotyped. And going through therapy, doing all the work and learning to love myself, it's been really powerful for me. I've been able to move from really conservative ideas to really, really inclusive ones. I really have had such a change in my perspective, and I'm so happy that I was able to do that. And I want other people, I want to be able to help other people to do that as well. But part of changing and being happy was deciding to surround myself with people who supported me, putting those people first and caring about what they had to say the most. And then I had to distance myself from people who were homophobic and racist. I needed to get safe spaces, because growth is something that everyone does for themselves, and they might not want to do it for me or you or whoever. And what's that really to say is that racism, sexism, homophobia, all these issues, they're not going away tomorrow. And it was important for me to keep people close to me who supported me and kept me happy and safe. And I think that there are people who help you end up becoming the person you end up being. And you can be grateful for those people, even if they weren't meant to be in your life forever. And I think for me, that's recovery. I've been really grateful to have this perspective and learn to really love myself. And I'm also learning now that I can start moving past those issues and those people and really decide to focus on keeping people close to me and caring about the people who love me and support me for me. That really was for me what real recovery really felt like, was moving on and keeping those safe spaces safe.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that, Joey. And what you just talked about having to really navigate it's a mindset of how to be your true identity, but also not wanting to be judged or looked down upon due to what you just mentioned of racism, sexism, homophobia, and you also mentioned stereotypes, which is our next topic that we're going to go into, because stereotypes can really affect the way we are treated and consequently our behavior around others as well. And so, speaking on stereotypes, for me, there were times in high school where I was the only Black student in the classroom. And in that moment, I feel like I had to not just be a good student, but an excellent student, because it felt as though I was representing the entire Black community in that classroom. I was the captain of our golf team and was typically the only Black person at the match. And I was trying my hardest to avoid stereotyping myself in those moments. So I'm making a conscious effort in presenting myself in a certain way, making sure I dressed as professional as possible, making sure I had a nice golf bag and clean shoes, and being as good as everyone else to prove that I, a Black person, belonged on the course that day. So Sarika, for you, how does the way the world sees you impact the way you think and act?
So I think that in South Asian culture specifically, we're always looked at the ones who excel academically and get extremely upset when we don't. And I think that as a South Asian, I always felt like I had to live up to that. I didn't need to be average smart. I needed to be South Asian smart, which meant, nothing less than a 90 was good enough. And even if you got the 90, what happened to the other 10 points? And it was just this constant pressure on me. And I needed people to know that I was studying and working hard and not slacking off for a South Asian. So I just felt like I needed to go at everything 10 times harder. And aside from academics, I felt like I had to make sure I fit the positive stereotypes of Indian culture and didn't fit the negative stereotypes. So, for example, there is a positive stereotype that many Indian families in the US are known to possess a lot of wealth and be extremely wealthy and prosperous. So I felt like for some weird reason, I always had to mention what my father did in a conversation, or I had to justify why I wasn't driving a more expensive car. In my mind, I felt like I was always being compared to other Indians. And if I didn't show that I was equal or greater, then I'd automatically be perceived as nothing or less or at the bottom. And there's also a negative stereotype. There's a negative stereotype about Indians, and when it comes to odor and smelling like curry and not maintaining proper hygiene. And I consistently felt the need to make sure that people knew I didn't fit that stereotype. So I would shower more than I had to and wear a lot more body spray than I needed to. And if I had even one piece of dandruff, I believed everyone was looking at me as dirty. And in retrospect, I don't think anyone really cared. But at the time, I really felt like they did. And I constantly felt like I was being compared to other Indians because of the stereotypes that we face.
Yeah, there's two sides to it, because you're trying to fulfill the positive stereotypes, and then you feel a responsibility to just not fulfill the negative ones. And so I think that adds a lot of pressure of this balancing act. And there's also two sides. Like for me, when I think about this, Elizabeth, is like, one, I'm trying to avoid those negative stereotypes, but at the same time, I still need to prove my Blackness within my community. So there's kind of two sides of that as well. So I'd love to hear from you, your experience with that.
All right. Yeah. I can start by talking a little bit about my experience in the queer community, because within this really, it's really truly a special and welcoming and affirming community. And there are absolutely expectations of what people who belong to this community look like. So because I'm femme, I wear makeup, I have long hair, I sometimes pass as straight, which we don't have time to unpack all of the problematic layers of that today. But I guess for me, this means a couple things. So first, it means that I am almost never discriminated against because of my sexual orientation. So no one looks at me and denies me service because I'm gay. No one uses homophobic rhetoric or slurs against me. And in many ways, I get to move through the world without a lot of the stereotypes and biases that some of the other speakers have experienced. Passing as straight also means that when I'm in my own community, people assume I'm showing up as an ally. People question my queerness. I have been in queer spaces where other queer people have told me, "Oh, you don't look like a lesbian." And it can be so invalidating and frustrating. And, as someone who, as previous speakers have said, who has struggled to accept myself, feeling like I'm not accepted in a community to which I belong can just be, it can be a lot to deal with. I don't really have time to get into all of this today, which is great for me because I don't have to rehash the time I shaved half of my hair off. But I've actively altered my appearance to try to gain acceptance and achieve visibility within the queer community. So that being said, yes, sometimes it gets frustrated. I get frustrated, right, with the stereotype of the queer woman because I don't necessarily fit that mold. And in that way, I can be rendered invisible in my community. But not having to grapple with some of the stereotypes and biases that some of the other speakers have experienced and spoke to, because I'm straight passing, but also because I'm white, it means that my life has never been in danger because of the way I appear to others. So I don't have to worry about negotiating who I am or what I do with what the world sees when it looks at me. I get to go into almost any situation, and I don't have to disprove stereotype X or expectation Y because people take me for me. I think Joey said something to the effect of, feeling like in his expression of himself, he had to represent all Hispanic people. And that's never going to be the case for me because if here's a really crazy example. If I say something absolutely ridiculous, people aren't like, wow, white people are strange. It's like, wow, Elizabeth, she's an odd one. I'm not a reflection of white people as a group because in the US, white is kind of like culturally and socially coded as the norm. And because of that, there's a lot of room within people's understandings of what a white person can be. So we tend to have much more limited understandings of Black folks, Indigenous folks, and people of color because historically white people haven't really made space for these folks. So in the absence of their voices, we've created stereotypes. And when we meet someone who doesn't adhere to the stereotype we have assigned to them, we can't fit that into our narrative, into our worldview. So out come microaggressions, which I think we're going to get into a little later.
Why not get into it now? I loved everything that you shared, and I love how you touch on the parts of privilege that people probably just take for granted or don't even realize, and so that's a huge part of it. But first, I do want to define microaggressions, because microaggressions have been defined as indirect, subtle, or unintentional discrimination against members of a marginalized group. I can think of a long list of ones I've heard personally, but Joey, I wanted to hear from you, to help illustrate what a microaggression can look like or sound like. Would you be able to provide a story or example of one?
Yes, I will. I had a perfect moment with this. So I was volunteering for something, and I was over email was talking to the director, and I said, thank you very much, Sincerely, Joseph Vasquez. And she responded, oh, hello, Jose. Thank you, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, ooh, ooh. And I was like, is that racist? Like, am I supposed to be upset? Because I think that's like because I think microaggressions, you're like, it's so, I think it's difficult because like, I know that woman was not coming from a bad place. Like she wanted me to be visible with my ethnicity. You know, she understood that I was a Hispanic person. And for those of you who don't know, Jose is Joseph in Spanish. So she was assuming that like that's what I go by, but that's not really what it is. Because you know it's ridiculous. To me because that's not my name. You know, it was Joseph. If I was going by Jose, it would have been Jose. And so I think sometimes it comes from a good place, and then it just doesn't actually pan out because I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if to be upset. I didn't know what to say to this woman. So what I ended up doing was I just wrote the email. And I said, you know, thank you, Joey, so that she understood that I don't use the a Spanish spelling or the Spanish version of Joseph. But I think that's like a perfect example. It's a microaggression. It's something that's small. She was assuming that she was taking my ethnicity and assuming that a lot of things about me that I go by Jose, that's how I want to go by. You know, there were a lot of things there. And she, you know, she apologized. I think she understood what she had done after. But I think it's those little things that you're like, is that racist? Like, you know, is that bad? Should I be upset? Like, and I now I realize, yes, I had a right to be upset. But it took me a really, really long time to realize, oh, that was not okay. That made a lot of assumptions about me. You know, that was why I had that feeling in my chest where it's just like I didn't feel good. And it's just a small thing. It's so hard for people to understand, I think.
Well,
That's like perfect example.
No, I was just going to say the strange thing is that sometimes microaggressions come from someone trying to overcompensate to make a minority feel more comfortable. And then it kind of just backfires. And that's when we talk about microaggressions. And so for me, back in middle school and high school, Brooke, when I think of microaggressions, I think of things that I specifically heard over and over again, that it gets to you the first time, and then by the time I got to high school, I just heard it so much that it gets to a frustrating place. So what was your experience with that?
Yeah, microaggression. It's funny because I actually didn't even understand the wording, like that word, until just a few years ago. But then obviously as I recalled, you know, in my childhood, I was like, oh my gosh, people were so microaggressive towards me. So, you know, when I was younger and even as an adult, like the primary one I would get was, you're so pretty for a Black girl. And I remember just being like, what? Like I felt sick to my stomach the first time I heard it. By the end, I was like, oh my gosh, people are ridiculous. But like I felt so anxious because I started thinking to myself, like, people might actually find me unattractive, not because they just find me unattractive, but they find me unattractive because I'm Black. Like that was news to me. I didn't really know that that was a thing. I thought people just found people attractive because they found them attractive, not because they were Black or white or Asian or anything like that. So I'd never considered that. And, you know, another one that I would get a lot was, wow, if I didn't look at you and I just heard your voice, I'd totally think you were white. And that was also confusing to me because, you know, although I tried to alter my appearance a lot to assimilate to white culture, you know, I'd straighten my hair, I got really skinny and just would, you know, poise myself to assimilate towards whiteness. I never changed my voice. Like, this is literally just how I talk. You know, I grew up in the suburbs in LA, and, you know, tone and the way that we speak most of the time comes from geographics and where we live, not necessarily our race. So that was always confusing for me. And I just became really ashamed of my Black traits because of how, not only how people perceived them, but how they then would respond to me and kind of unintentionally sometimes share with me how they were perceiving my Blackness and my Black traits. You know, and I also had a lot of microaggressions related to my sexuality because I am biracial and I have been since I was, you know, in 9th grade. And of course, everyone, the primary thing we hear is it's just a phase. And, you know, people thought I was clearly straight because, like Elizabeth mentioned, you know, I am definitely feminine. I wear makeup. I'm cisgendered, so it's, you know, I don't look gay. but that has nothing to do with my sexuality because of the way I look. I enjoy being feminine, and that's okay. And I didn't really understand why people were saying that back then. But then, I also realized as I got older, and Elizabeth also mentioned this, like whiteness in America is seen as the norm. So a lot of the white people who would say these microaggressions to me regarding my race, they didn't even realize that what they were saying was as bad as it was. For instance, this one girl who I worked with who said, I would think you were white if I didn't look at you. When I called her out on it, she was like shocked. She was like, oh, like she didn't, like, it was like, I just, she had an existential crisis all in that one moment. Like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, and she like freaked out. So I think, calling people out is really important because a lot of microaggressions, like they don't even realize that they're making these microaggressions because whiteness is so normal in America. So yeah, she cried about it, and I was not happy that she cried, but I was happy that she realized it. I think that was an important growth point for her. So yeah, I'm very familiar with microaggressions.
I think what is so apparent when we talk about the microaggressions and when we talk about stereotypes and so many of the things that minorities go through, it's clear that it's so important and vital for minorities to really have sources of support to go to and to feel comforted in so many moments, especially like over the summer. My friends who are Black, when the George Floyd video went viral, we just got on, it was like midnight, and we just got on Zoom and we just talked and we were there for each other. We were sources of support in that moment of just being there for each other and knowing the perspective that we kind of had going through that and the emotions that we felt. And that was kind of that safe space of knowing the people I'm talking to actually understand me, which I feel is really important when speaking on things that affect your mental health. So, Brooke, where do you find your sources of support?
Yeah. For me, it was also really important to find my circle and to find my affinity group. When I was younger, especially being biracial, I was always like, oh, well, that's not cool. It's exclusive and exclusionary and all of that. But I realized when like that it's just important, but I also made sure that when I was in groups of like all people of color, all Black people, that it didn't turn into one of those places where you just complain and you bash white people. Because I was in this one particular group that was called like 50 Shades of Bay. It was like a women's people of color Facebook group. And I was like, oh, this is so cool. We can talk about being a woman and being, this and that. But it just turned into just white bashing. And for me, that was not good for my mental health. Firstly, because I don't like it when people hate each other. And secondly, because I'm half white. So that was bad. So we have to find the right groups. Like we have to make sure that we're, fitting into the places that actually feel right, not places that are just, our minority group. So like something that actually resonates with who we are as a person. Just because people are in our same minority group doesn't necessarily mean that we align on all values. So finding that safety is really, really important. And I also find support in my friends, my pets. I have 2 dogs and a cat named Max, and they're the best. My partner, he's incredible. And, my Black community that I never had in LA. When I moved to Western Massachusetts, because I'm from Los Angeles originally and now live in Western Mass, I started working at this farm called Soulfire. And I still work there. And this farm, it's dedicated to ending injustice and inequity in the food system. So it's very focused on bringing Black, brown, and Indigenous people to the land in a healthy way to farm because, Indigenous people were kicked off the land. Black people were forced to work the land. So really reinvigorating that healthy relationship with growing food and farming. And, being in that group of people and around people who not only understand me, but who also celebrate their Blackness and celebrate that relationship to land and each other. And, not just celebrating survival, but celebrating like real thriving for me was the most amazing thing in the world. Because, when I think about Black Lives Matter, we're basically like, for a lot of people anyway, we're basically saying like Black people deserve to be alive. But like, of course, Black people deserve to be alive. But, when I found this group, it was like, but what is Black life actually? Like, what does that actually look like for you and for her and for him and for them? How do you actually show your Blackness? So, we started connecting with each other's like Black joy and success and Black happiness and what that really looks like for us as individuals and as a community. We're not only connecting with each other because of our experiences of Black pain and fear, but we were also, connecting on Black happiness and how we enjoy our Black culture and our ancestry. Just simply enjoying our lives, engaging in our passions, believing in ourselves, caring for others, caring for ourselves. Like, that's the way to joy, and that's really the way to live Black Lives Matter, in my opinion. And the only way I was able to find that truth for myself and that just that support was by finding this community full of Black people and people of color who are just positive, loving, supportive, willing to express their trauma and their fear and their anxieties and all of that, but then to always come back around to trying to heal it together. And be proud and flaunt our happiness and our success, and not just always stay stuck on talking about our Black fear and our Black pain. So finding a group, a positive group for me is like where I find the majority of my support.
I love when you talk about Black joy. Like, it's just my favorite. I never want to cut you off when you talk about it, but I appreciate that perspective so much. And so, Sarika, for you, where do you find your sources of support?
Yeah, I think it's surprising based on everything I said about, my family and the stereotypes. And there's definitely this generational gap between what we perceive as mental illness and what our parents do. But I have now been able to find a lot of support in my nuclear family. And if there's anyone that's listening and doesn't believe that their parents could ever be a support system, which is something that I thought, I do really want to share a quick story. So I had my suicide attempt my freshman year of high school, and it was during finals week. And as I mentioned, academics are paramount in Indian culture. It's all we care about. So my father actually went into my school and basically told the vice principal, my daughter is currently hospitalized due to a suicide attempt, and she won't be able to take her finals. Is there anything that she can do to make them up so her GPA is intact? And the vice principal just stared at my father and said, sir, your daughter just had a suicide attempt. There are much bigger problems here. And I tell this story because it truly captures how much grades mattered more than my mental health. And it's almost impossible to think that my father, someone with that mindset, could be my ally. But years later, my dad is the one yelling at me for being upset over an 85. And it wasn't my work ethic that changed. It was his mentality. It was me constantly communicating my feelings to him and being honest with him and being open with him about what I was going through, even if I didn't feel like he understood me in that moment. So I do really want to say, don't immediately give up trying to find a support system in family, because they truly do have the potential to be one of the most incredible support systems out there. And if unfortunately that doesn't work, which many times it might not, I've also learned that there are a lot of people willing to listen. You have friends, as you see on the slide. There are so many different things that you can do and places to find support, and you'll definitely find one that works for you. Finding a few friends to confide in, it was a blessing to me, and disregarding the opinions of others actually allowed me to discuss my troubles even further and find even more sources of support. So I've been able to use so many of the things on that slide, and I definitely think that one will work for anyone out there who's struggling.
Thank you. And I'm sorry, what you said means a lot to me, but my computer was going to die. That's why I had to dip out. I'm sorry. It really did mean a lot to me. So I'm sorry for dipping out, but I was listening. And I love what you had to share as well, and kind of giving that optimism of parents who can come around and can open up to understanding mental health, especially with their children. And allyship was something I wanted to end on. Because, again, going back to George Floyd, when that happened back in May, I heard the term allyship a lot. And I also had people reach out to me and asked how they could be an ally. So I felt this would be great for Brooke, for Joey, for Elizabeth to speak on allyship and what it means to them. So Brooke, if you want to go first, what do you look for in an ally? What do you look for them to do in actions?
Yeah, there's my cat Max. She just came over to say hi real quick. Yeah, but as far as allyship for me, it's really about speaking up. It's about saying something. It's about standing up for what's right. Like if I had a white friend who was standing with me and another white person said some microaggression and they didn't say anything, that wouldn't feel like an ally to me. You call people out. It looks like being involved in community programs that can actually change things, but community programs that actually lift up people of color. Because what I noticed too about a lot of well-intentioned white people is that they come in as, like, I'm sure you've heard the term white savior. So they'll come in and they'll try to, speak for people of color. So really giving space for people of color and Black people to speak. Allyship is looking at your own privilege, your own implicit bias, reflecting on that and doing things to change it, recognizing your own mistakes, and not making excuses for those mistakes. It's about not being defensive, not being egotistical, but being like a truly compassionate person that's willing to actually listen and stand up for what is right, because if something is wrong and you don't do anything about it, like, you don't actually feel good after that. So just being able to be like, you know what? No, I'm going to stand up for what's right here. Even if it's an innocent little, ignorant microaggression, it's important to say something. It all really matters, because those little microaggressions, they accumulate and they really not only can change how a person of color sees themselves, but it changes like just the climate and the energy of the spaces that we walk into. And it usually just leads to more discrimination and ignorance, and someone else hears it and then they use it. It always needs to be addressed and called out. And then also remembering that, like, systemic racism is real. A lot of people try to say like, oh well, slavery was so long ago, but if you really do your research, yes, that type of enslavement, it's in the past, but there are so many other things, like Jordan mentioned in the beginning, that have affected Black people in particular, but people of color all around, that need to be recognized. And if you can recognize that, do your research and see it and actually believe it and not make excuses for it, then you can be a true ally, because you're coming from a place of like knowledge and authenticity. A lot of laws were set up to discriminate against Black and brown people. That's the reality. Let's stop pretending it's not there, or that things are better. Some things are better, of course, but this is not over. This is not the time to remind everyone that all lives matter. We know that, of course it does. No one is disputing that all lives matter, but all lives can't matter until Black lives matter. I'm sure you've all heard that too. I love the metaphor. If your house is on fire, your neighbor's house is on fire, and you call the fire department, you're not going to be like, but wait, check out my house first, because all houses matter. Like, you'd never say that. So let's just be real here and focus on what the problem is, address that, and then we can all move forward together in harmony. So being an ally, saying something, recognizing that systemic racism is real, and it has been real, and it will continue to be real until we can all group together and do something to change it.
I love what you said there, speaking about how people will minimize the history of America, especially when it comes to slavery. And I remember hearing a woman speak on this, is that someone questioned her and said, hey, well, slavery was this many years ago. And she was really quick to correct that person and saying, in America, Black people have still spent more years enslaved, more than they've been free in this country. And when you put it in that perspective, it's really deep to think how systemic racism goes back all the way till then, until today. And so, sorry, Joey, for going off board, because I know I said I wanted to hear from you. So Joey, what does allyship mean to you?
I think to really be an ally, you have to start by learning, how has the group of people I want to support been marginalized? It's about understanding what LGBT or people of color have been through, what challenges they face. You should know that. And if you're really an ally, you shouldn't have to wonder why we need to change these things. You shouldn't have to wonder, I just so many times it's like, well, is it really that big of a problem? I hear that all the time. And if you know exactly what has happened to these marginalized communities, you shouldn't need to ask if we need to change for the better. We know we have to. And so I really think like if I'm with someone who calls himself an ally, I shouldn't have to explain to them literally everything about, what I or other people have been through that they're trying to support. And I love talking to people. I love explaining things to people who aren't part or might not have like my lived experience and perspective, but like you still have to do your own research. And when it comes to taking action, I think there's a lot of ways to be an ally, because I needed that one person who told me that it was okay to be myself. I needed a second to have space, 1 minute, 1 hour, whatever. I needed someone to give me that space till that I had a second where I felt like I didn't need to hate myself, that I could like myself. And that can be very little things. A pride sticker on the door, a poster on the wall, a rainbow lanyard, a trans button on a backpack. I always wear this rainbow bracelet because I want to be visible as bisexual, as someone who's part of the LGBT community, but also so that other people can see me. And I want them to see this bracelet. I want them to know, hey, I'm going to be someone who's not going to discriminate against you. I want to give signals that I can be a safe space. And if I feel like it's genuine, I really, and it's someone I've never met before, and I see a little pride sticker or a little something, and I really don't know who they are, and I feel like it's there for a reason, it makes me feel way more comfortable around them, way more comfortable. And I think it's important to remember that allies, we can, you can make space. If you're cis or straight or you're one of those privileged categories, you can make so much space for other people, because people will listen to you. People will listen to white cis straight people talk about these things, and they'll be more inclined to believe them. Allies, you are the ones with so much power for making change happen. And like people of color, LGBT people, we're working to make change happen too. That's why we're all here right now. But it's important to remember that you can have a big impact. And we need to start really changing the narrative about talking about these issues. We need to start treating these issues for what they are. Racism, LGBT phobia. We need to start seeing them for what they are, because these are life-changing issues. They're life-ending issues. And allies need to start to treat it with that level of severity, because we want things to be better, and there's a lot at stake. But we can do it, if we all really are trying to understand and work toward this change. I know that we can get there.
So near the end there, because this is actually something that I said, was that this isn't just a trend, that it's not you just go on social media and you post a few things and then, oh, okay, I did good. But it's so much deeper than that, because it's not a trend. It is our livelihood. And I love that you made that point. So thank you. Elizabeth, you have a very interesting perspective of your role of looking for allyship, but also finding your role in being an ally.
Yeah. I first want to say I'm like so jazzed right now hearing from all of these incredible peers of mine. I'm so lucky to be here. And Jordan, I will say you've sort of opened a can of worms, because this is something I feel really passionate about, both in my, well, not both, but in my personal life, in my academic work. I think being an ally and justice for people of color is super important. So I have a lot of things to say here, but I'm really, really going to try to focus. All right. So Joey and Brooke have offered a lot of really, really important insights in this conversation about allyship. And I will do my best not to repeat all of the truly fabulous things they said. And so for this conversation, I'm going to sort of approach it from the white perspective. So I think being white and simultaneously being an ally starts by looking super hard at ourselves and at the role white privilege has played in our lives, at the benefits we get from simply being white in a culture, in a society that both implicitly and explicitly prizes whiteness above pretty much everything else. So we can start there, right? We examine our own privilege. We seek to uncover and interrogate the biases we carry with us, often implicitly, and that's great, right? But I think I've seen so many white people And I'm not excluding myself from this. All of these things are things I need to work on too. But I think too many white folks stop here because it gets like kind of uncomfortable. And I've seen before, like one of two things tend to happen. The first is that like we start to feel really guilty and it feels overwhelming. And it's like, what could we possibly do to make things better at this point? It's overwhelming. Or we get defensive and we say things like, well, my ancestors came from, insert European country here with nothing and they had to build from the ground up. And also I'm not racist. And this is white fragility, which by the way, instead of reading the book White Fragility, which is a super important book, but is also written by a white woman, I would really highly recommend the book White Rage, which is by Carol Anderson, who is a Black professor. So instead of just stopping at, I guess, either of these 2 points that too often tend to be terminals, we need to look inward, but then move forward. So moving forward can mean a lot of different things. And Brooke talked about calling others out when you hear something inaccurate or racist. She talked about getting involved in meaningful, impactful community work. Joey spoke on understanding and empathy. We can also commit as white people to abandoning this performative activism that I think Jordan spoke to. We're seeing a lot of right now because Black Lives Matter is trending. Yes, like I think white people still need to go to protest and we still need to post content on social media. But at protests, we can be allies by, if a news outlet comes up to you asking for a quote, direct them to one of the people of color who is protesting or organizing. Or you can use, white people, we can use our bodies to physically separate police from Black, Indigenous people of color who are targeted at much higher rates than us. It's a lot safer for us to put our bodies in the line of fire. And when it comes to social media, like we have to ask ourselves before we post picture evidence, like who's this for? Who does it support? What are my intentions in posting these pictures? And if we're sharing content related to anti-racism, yay! And we can and should be aware of who has written this content, what its context is, and what might be missing for the people reading and attempting to interpret it. So if we can make it more accessible, this anti-racist content more accessible for, I will say, the harder to reach white folks, we should. I would also add that for white folks in particular, we can move forward by making reparations or financial amends for historical wrongs. This seems like a really scary and controversial thing, but it doesn't have to be. We don't have to pay thousands and thousands of dollars if that's not reasonable for us. White people can commit to paying reparations in more manageable ways, like through small monthly contributions. But I do consider it to be my responsibility as a white person who continues to profit from racism and benefit from the historical and current work of Black people, Indigenous people, people of color. It's my responsibility to pay my financial privilege forward to Black and brown organizations or pools or individuals. And then I guess a final thing I'll say, I really had to pare this down, but I tried to pick out a few important things for me. But I think a final thing we can do moving forward is we can stop asking people of color to teach us all the things we need to know to be good allies. Members of these communities, Black communities, Indigenous communities, communities of color, especially in the US, they have spent centuries trying to stay alive under all of the oppressive systems white people have created. And during this time, members of these communities have still managed to share their pain and their strength and their joy and their trauma with us. And asking Black and brown folks who right now and historically have been literally working overtime just to stay alive, asking them to teach us about their trauma and like, how do we undo all this damage we've caused? That creates so much more emotional labor for them. There's so many great, powerful resources created by people of color that already exist. And I would really recommend one of my favorite, I guess, places to look for this is rachelricketts.com/anti-racism-resources. It's a collection of anti-racist resources kind of collected by a Black woman. And that is RACHELRICKETTS.com/anti-racism-resources. Okay, so obviously, white people, we have a lot of work to do, but we have to start somewhere. And right now, it's such a powerful moment because there's so many avenues for us to enter into anti-racist work right now. And really quickly, this will be my last aside, but anti-racist work is different from non-racist work, as I've learned in my allyship journey. Anti-racist work is affirmative, right? It's not the absence of racism. It's the act of intentionally, I like to say, like intentionally taking bricks out of the walls that hold up the white, English-speaking, cis heteropatriarchy. And it's taking those bricks and giving them to people of color so they can build sanctuaries and we can support in that building. It's educating other white people and it's living lives as white people that affirm the Black joy that Brooke talked about, that affirm the lives and the thriving of Black people, Indigenous people, people of color around us through advocacy, intentional self-reflection, and sometimes uncomfortable discussion, community, and direct action. So it's theory, it's practice, it's internal and external, but it's a perfect time for us to get into that right now. So thank you for letting me go off on that. I really appreciate it, friends.
I think there's a few points in there that I really liked. I think that it's important to note that systemic oppression and racism has nothing to do with intent. That's why it's a system. It's built for, like I said, the barriers to protect the people that are able to be privileged because of the assertions that I talked about before. But that is one of the issues, is people think that racism and systemic oppression, like all of this has to come from intent, because a lot of people have great intent of wanting to help others, but it's important to know how deeply rooted this goes. So I appreciate you touching on that, and also about social media. One of the things that I am happy about that a lot of people have done, who've gone to protest, they've posted stories and posts on Instagram and Facebook. And what I love about that is that in 4 to 5 years, they're going to get a memory. And I would just love to ask all of those people, when you get that memory of being at a George Floyd protest 4 or 5 years from now, ask yourself if you're still fighting for the same cause. And I think that's a really important thing to remind ourselves. And also one of the benefits of social media is getting that reminder. So I'm glad that's there. But I want to thank everyone. I'd like to thank Joey, Brooke, Elizabeth, and Sarika for sharing your experiences. I know it's not easy to share and reflect on so many of the issues we touched on today, but I appreciate all of you for being so honest with your answers. And for those of you who listen to this conversation, thank you. By listening and validating the experiences of minorities, you empower the voices of those communities. By acknowledging privilege and holding others accountable when hearing microaggressions and stereotypes, you're on the path to becoming an ally. Continue to listen, continue to learn. By doing that, you're not just supporting minorities, you're supporting our mental health as well. On behalf of myself and everyone at Minding Your Mind, thank you for watching.